This video is brought to you by Perfection and Perfection Store. Can I sponsor my own video? When you have some time, please visit perfectionstore.com, and there you can find all of my favorite Japanese knife makers as well as knives that I have designed myself. All right, well, enjoy the review. By the way, my home, so my kids wanted to decorate the home, and because my new filming area is in the living room that we don't use all that often, my kids decided to overtake my room and they said, "Daddy, your filming area either has to go or our decoration is going right through it." They're really sweet about it. They really love decorating, and so I let them decorate the home however they like. If you guys have followed my channel for some time, you'll know that I used to use a lot of thick wood cutting boards, and I've moved away from that mainly because I've been getting more into raw foods like sushi and prepping more raw meats on my cutting boards. And so I wanted a board that is easy to move around the kitchen, to wash. I've been using these Asahi boards now in my home for I would say about 6 months or so. And before that, I had the Hasegawa cutting boards and a number of off-brand makes of different types of rubberized cutting boards. Now, during my travels in Japan, I've noticed whenever I go to a sushi restaurant, there are really 3 types of cutting boards that are used. It's either Hasegawa, Asahi, or some form of hinoki cutting board. Hinoki is a wood cutting board, but it's used in sushi restaurants because the wood has a lot of resin infused in it, or natural resin in the board. And so it kind of makes it water repellent, not necessarily waterproof, but definitely water repellent. It's a really nice cutting board. I've actually owned a couple of them here. I posted a video, I want to say a year and a half ago, probably closer to a year and a half ago to 2 years, with a comparison between the standard boards. So this is a standard board. So I'll kind of give you a conclusion of the standard boards at the end of the video. But they're a fine board. If you want to see the complete review of this board, go to the video, which I will link in the video description. You can hear all about this board. First of all, the quality of these boards they're very, very high. I don't have anything negative to say about them. So this one here is the thin one. I got a 15 millimeter board. And this size here is 500 millimeters by 250. Which is 17 3/4 by 9 3/4. And what's really nice about pretty much all of Asahi boards is their ratio. So they have what we call, or what I call, a 2-to-1 ratio. So the length of the board, or the width, if you're using it this way, is twice the size of the depth. And that's really important for a number of reasons. The first one is if you live in a home that's very small, sometimes when you buy a board that is only, let's say, 9 inches deep, oftentimes in a Western store, say you go to your local retailer here, the ratio is probably closer to like a 3-to-4 ratio, or sometimes a 9-to-16 ratio. So if you have a 9-inch deep board, the width of the board may only be 15 or 16 inches. And so by having a ratio of 2-to-1, your board, the real estate you can get is actually quite nice, even if you don't have a very deep area to work with. So I really enjoy the fact that these boards are made with that 2-to-1 ratio. The material that they're using is very smooth. It's a block of rubber, which is really nice. And it's not really, I wouldn't call it flexible. You can see there is some flex in it, just not a whole lot. So it is a fairly dense, I'm sorry about that. It is a fairly dense material. And what's also interesting is the wood, you can see the wood particles in this board here. If you were to flip this over to the cleaner side and you look really closely, you'll see wood particles or darker spots all throughout the board. And that's basically them mixing the mixture of wood particles, wood shavings, or I would say, yeah, just wood particles and rubber. And then they lay all this out into a nice big sheet, and then they'll cut it out to whatever size they want. And that allows them to basically give you an infinite range of sizes, which is really nice if you want to customize what you want for your home, for your restaurant. So this is the exact same size board as the 15 millimeter board, but it's 20 millimeters thick. This is where I see the value of the Asahi boards really start making sense as far as the premium grade boards. This is when the cut quality and the sound quality while you're cutting makes it much more pleasurable to use. Being such a thin board, the 50mm board will kind of reflect a lot of the energy that you cut or you input into the board back to you. The 20mm boards will absorb a little bit more of the energy, and the sound that you get while you're cutting is a little bit deeper. It's more thumpy and less clackety, if that makes any sense. And I did do a cut test a little while back when I was making some daikon and some onions. So if I remember while I'm editing this video to actually put those clips in right now, you can hear exactly what they sound, and I'll label the videos or label the clips so you know exactly what you're listening to. I haven't cleaned these boards with anything other than a regular hard, I wouldn't call it hard, it's a mesh, plastic mesh sponge that I use in my home. On the Hasegawas, after every few months or so, I would spray the board down with a bleach, a 50-50 bleach and water mixture, and it actually whitens the board perfectly and cleans it really, really well. I haven't done that with this board yet because I wanted to see exactly what it looks like. I also spoke to the rep over at Asahi, and they also said to me that these boards here, the way they're designed, because they are a solid block, you can sand these boards down over time. So if a board gets too dirty, which is kind of what we're seeing here, you can actually just take 400, 600 grit sandpaper, sand the surface down, remove a few microns of thickness, and you will have a fresh board. That's actually a really good selling point. I haven't tried that yet because I haven't felt the need to do it to this board yet. but I will do it maybe for another long-term test video, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like. This board here is 600 by 300, and it measures to about 23 3/4 to 11 3/4 inch. So a fairly large board for my home. This board here, you can see, is 30 millimeters thick. Very, very thick. Very beefy. Definitely heavier than a wood board of its size. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is, well, yeah, this, I wouldn't say this is 20 pounds, but definitely 14, 15 pounds or so. Very heavy board. And it's really nice, okay? I have to say, if money was no object, this is the board I would say just get if you just want a really nice board. And also a few months back, I used the largest board that they make, which is, I think twice the size. I want to say it's like 4 foot wide by 2 feet deep. It's huge. I don't know, I want to say it was 30, 40 pounds or so. And I did it, I went to visit the folks over at Riviera Seafood Club and to have a sashimi cutting tutorial, and that's what we used there, and we all love the board unanimously. And yeah, it was a really nice board. Oh yeah, so I got these blocks here. These are block samples, color samples of the colors they offer. The colors are only optional for the standard versions. So they offer blue, pink, the cream, and the green. All very nice colors, nice pastel colors, nice fall colors, I guess you can say, and very beautiful. The blue is especially nice. It just has a really nice glow to it. The pink is nice too, very interesting. I don't know if I'll have this in my home, but I can definitely see people loving the pink. The blue and the green are really nice. Tan, the tan, the cream is something that I've always had with rubber cutting boards, so I'm used to seeing it, and I'm kind of bored with this color. But yeah, if I had to buy a cutting board for my home long-term, permanently, I would consider the blue or the pink, or the blue. Oh, that's a Freudian slip there. The blue or the green, I definitely really like seeing in these sample pieces here. But yeah, this is all they are, just samples. So this is what they call the professional soft thin. You can see this is only 8 millimeters thick, and it feels substantially different from this Pro board. When I look at this board here and I compare it to the thicker boards, the other Pro boards, they look different. This has I would say a grippier texture. It's a really nice matte finish on this board. What's really nice about this board here is that it is quite light. It's flexible, but when you lay it down, it will retain its shape. It doesn't have the memory of the bend that you had in it. And so it lays completely flat after you bend it. I can really see this board being a popular item for those who want to move to a rubber cutting board, but don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money for the heavier boards with thicker boards. And also, this is really great for backyard barbecuers, those who want to travel with the board, or people who want to travel with a high-grade quality board. This is a really good option. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages I have found with these boards here. That's something that we should definitely explore. The first being the obvious is the stain. Now, I don't say that about all the other boards I've used. The Hasegawas, they didn't really stain as much as these boards here. But let's just talk about these boards. So the staining is definitely something you should consider with these boards. It doesn't really bother me as a person who tests lots of boards and lots of knives. For me, this is expected, and it's actually good for me to see. If you were to grill a piece of steak and throw it on here, which is exactly what I did, and I left the grease and drippings of that meat on this board for, I want to say, 10 minutes while it cooled. And then after I cut the meat and I took the meat off, I left all of the juices on this board for a good 3 or 4 hours. Now, why would I do something like that? It's a torture test, I know. And that's exactly what it was. In your home, even in my home, after I cook a meal, I don't want to sit there and clean the board down. I know some of you may want to do that, but I've got 3 kids in the home, a dog, a wife, and sometimes I've got guests over, and so I don't want to be cleaning right after I cook. And so there will be times where I leave water on my cutting board. There may be times there may be some water on my knives. It just depends on what is happening in the home. So that's why I left the juices on this board, and just to see what it happens. And you can see it will absorb a little bit amount of stain each time you use it. And again, for me, that's not going to bother me. So cosmetically, that's the biggest disadvantage to these boards. Feedback and chopping and cutting, when you're cutting on these boards, how do they feel? Really nice. I initially thought that these were going to be more like a rubber tire, where if you were to slash the board, the rubber may split and leave that obvious scar there. These are not quite as soft as you would expect, even though they say these are synthetic rubber boards. They are very, very dense. And if you told me that they weren't rubber, I would believe you, because they are so dense and you cannot bend this board. This is the 20 millimeter version. You can't bend this board at all. I mean, you got to put a lot of force onto this board, and it has to be really long for you to actually flex it and bend it. So it is a very, very highly dense board, very hard material. My initial fear of these boards was because they are rubber. I was afraid that I would damage the rubber as I'm cutting them, but not so. I used them just like any other wooden cutting boards, and they held up just as well to my fast chopping. So there were two concerns that I want to address from the previous cutting board video. Was first, can you scoop food up with your knife and your hands after you're chopping it? The answer is yes. This board here, there is no fine pattern on this board. This is just a perfectly smooth cutting board, perfectly smooth surface. And so you can literally take your knife and scoop food up. There was no problems at all. And the other question was, do particulates come up while you're using this board, and does it kind of flake and does it fall apart as you're using it? Sort of. Only if you're trying to make materials come off of the board will it actually happen. So there were a couple times where the board is wet and I'm taking the edge of my knife and I'm scraping the surface of the board, and I did notice some very, very small materials come off of the board onto the knife. Now again, that was because I was trying to. When I was doing it at natural speed, when I'm cutting onions, I'm scooping onions and just putting it into a bowl, there was no scraping, like hard scraping of the knife into the board. So I didn't really see that being a problem. In my cut test, and in my kitchen, I was finding that the two smaller boards, so especially the 15 millimeter thin boards, this would slide every once in a while, especially if there were any water on the counter. Normally in the past, I've always used the Hasegawa, the blue, really, really nice blue mats the Hasegawa sells. Now, as far as a material, an anti-slip material, they are, I would say, the best I've used for any sort of cutting boards, whether it's a wood cutting board or a rubber cutting board. It is the grippiest material I've used without being tacky. There's only two negatives I have to say about them. Is first, they're expensive, and second is that they have these, the pattern that's on them, it's these little dots, right? There's these little round dots that are like 3 to 4 millimeters wide throughout the entire surface, both sides of the mat. And sometimes if the mat is wider or longer than your cutting board, food particles ingredients can actually fall into the cracks and kind of sit there for a while. And you can't get it out unless you wash it. You may have to wash it and get a little toothpick to pick the foods out. So that can happen with those mats. And so unless you have a mat that is the exact same size as your board, they become annoying to clean once in a while. I figured what other solutions are there. So you can either buy a cheap solution, like a really cheap solution at the dollar store, or on Amazon for like a couple of dollars for those anti-slip mats. They're really thin, they tend to wear out over time, and they kind of just aren't very grippy if you buy cheap mats. I went out and bought a roll of silicone mats. So I actually found a roll, I want to say it was 5 feet wide by 10 feet long for like $100 or so. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but that's a lot of material. And these are really nice. They're about 1.5 to maybe 2 millimeters thick. So this particular mat here is 2 millimeters thick. Yeah, 2 millimeters thick. And I bought, like I said, I guess what would that be? 10 by 5, so 50 square foot of this stuff for about $100, give or take a few dollars. And it has made everything in my home better. And so I custom cut them I customize them into any size I want. And so this is what I use for my larger cutting boards. And this was for something I use in my garage. I was doing some stuff on my workbench and I didn't want the workbench getting cut or like stained. So I cut one of these sheets and I put it on my workbench and did my work there. Matter of fact, one of my workbenches that I use for my garden has this on the entire surface of the workbench. And so water will not penetrate through, and all of my work on it, the pots that I use to garden with, none of it rolls off. The tools, I can throw the tools right onto the bench without worrying it banging onto the table. It's a really fantastic material. And so that's what I would recommend you getting. I mean, you can obviously go and buy a special mat made for cutting boards, like by the Hasegawa ones, but for everyday use and for multiple use cases, getting yourself a nice silicone roll and cutting whatever you need is a much more economical and better utility for your home. So that's what I use for my kitchen. So that's what I recommend. I don't sell these. I don't make them or sell them. So you can probably get them on Amazon. That's where I got them. That's a really, really good tool to have. And if I do find the link for these things, I'll leave it linked in the video description. But yeah, that's my spiel on anti-slip mats. So let's talk about who these are for. Let me pull this board here and bring it back into the picture. This is a standard. It's been used for a few weeks in my home and just kind of as a refresher for me. You can see it's got some use. This is the new side, this is the used side. It's got some discoloration, but not a whole lot. And I was cleaning it this morning, and you can see that even though it was only cleaned this morning, like a half an hour ago, you can see that it's completely dry. And if you were to do the same thing with these Pro boards, they stay moist. I wouldn't say they stay wet, but the surface of these boards do absorb a little bit of water, and the water will stay there for a few hours. It takes a few hours for that water to evaporate. And so that's also the other difference between the standard boards and the Pro boards. The standard boards do not absorb any water at all. I believe they are a rubber board. They are rubber, but they are of the densest quality of rubber and probably a lower grade quality because they're not as soft as the Pro boards, but they're quite nice. And the only negatives I have about these boards here, the non-Pro boards by Asahi, is they're loud. When you're doing quick chops like the way I cut, they're very, very loud. If that wasn't your cutting style, if you just do a lot of rolling on your cutting edge, on the knife's belly, these boards are great because they help retain the knife's edge really well, almost as well as the Pro boards. It doesn't absorb water, it doesn't absorb stains, and it comes in different colors, so that's a bonus there for the non-Pro version. So between the 15 millimeter, 20 millimeter, and the 30 millimeters, who are they for? Do I recommend them? Are they worth your money? Okay, so that's a hard one to answer because I do think that if you want to preserve your knife's edge, these and the Hasegawas are probably the two best boards I've used in terms of edge retention for your knives. These have been in my home, like I said, for about 6 months. The knives I'm using have been in my home for like 7 or 8 months, and I can't say they feel exactly as sharp as the day I got them or the day I brought them into my kitchen, but the knives are still very sharp. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the cutting boards I'm using. And that was the same thing with the Hasegawas. The knives I was using during that time really didn't dull all that much relative to when I was using my wood cutting boards. Again, that's subjective. I haven't done any objective testing on that, so take it how you want to take it. 30 millimeter boards, I would say if you are in a restaurant setting, in a professional setting, and you obviously have the money, then the 30 millimeter boards will make sense because you don't have to move them a whole lot, right? That's really the biggest disadvantage I see with the 30 millimeter boards. And most of the time in my home, when I clean my boards, it's with a 50-50 solution of vinegar and water, and I just spray the entire surface down, wipe it down. But there are times when food are crusted or like baked materials or powdered flour and water will sit here and they kind of crust. You do have to bring that to the sink and wash it. So So there are times when I do have to bring this to the sink, and that's when I don't want to be carrying a 30mm board around. The 20mm board gives me all of the advantages of the cutting performance of the 30mm thickness, but in a much lighter weight. Now for the 50mm board, it's a nice step up from your plastic cutting boards that you may have been using. Even though it is using the same materials as the other Pro versions, it is thinner, and that thinner material, that thinner thickness, does send a lot of the energy back to the user when you're doing quick cuts. So that's the only negative I find about this board here, is that you're not really getting the full benefit of the material because of how thin the board is. I don't recommend against buying this board. I would just say that if you were conflicted between the 50mm board Pro version versus the standard version, I would say the standard version will do 95% of the job of the Pro version, because it's only a tad bit louder than the Pro version. But other than that, they feel very similar to me, at least, you know, in my use case. And this to me was, again, the biggest surprise. This was a board that I really liked using, and I didn't think I would like the 8mm thick version that much because of how thin it is. But after using it, this is a product I really enjoy using. It's easy to use. It comes in a number of sizes. It's light. It's flexible. Not that I would ever bend this. I mean, if you had to like throw some pots and pans on it and carry it to the car, that's fine. I would never try to squeeze this board past what this is here. But it's just a very unique product, and it lays flat after a few seconds of putting it on the counter or on any sort of work surface, and it's ready to go. Is it my favorite product? In terms of the material, I would say that the material that's on this board is my favorite. It feels the nicest. It has a really nice texture. It's matte finish. It's softer. It actually feels softer than the other Pro boards that we got down here. It absorbed cutting force fairly well. I did plenty of fast chopping on this board, and I never felt like it was sending too much of the energy back to me. So it's a very interesting material. I do like this board a lot, I have to admit. In my opinion, the 20mm board would be the way to go if you were choosing between one of the Pro boards, between the 15mm, 20mm, and the 30mm. I find that the 20mm is the best value overall. It offers all of the performance gains of the 30mm without the energy feedback of the 50mm. When you have some time, please visit perfectionstore.com, and there you can find all of my favorite Japanese knife makers as well as knives that I have designed myself. So if you guys have a chance, please visit the store and let me know what I can do to improve the store. All right? Well, thank you for being here, and I'll catch you in the next video.